This is lesson 6.3b. We're going to be writing decimal percents less than 1 as a fraction and as a decimal. So in the last lesson, we were looking at percents that were greater than 100, and we were looking at fraction percents, and now today we're going to be looking at decimal percents. So let's start by looking at example 3 here, where it says write the percent of the solution, that is water, as a fraction and as a decimal. So that sentence right there gives us the information that we'll need to write the decimal as a fraction as a decimal. It says that 0.9%, which is 0.9% of this solution is water. So if we look at this zoomed in picture, 0.9% is less than 1%. So it's not yet filled in one whole cube there. But we're going to follow the same procedure. If we're going to be writing 0.9% as a fraction. Okay, well, percent. What does percent mean? Percent means for every 100. So we would have 0.9 to 100. 0.9 over 100. Now, we have never seen a decimal as a numerator. That's because you can't have a decimal as a numerator. So we're going to be moving the decimal to the end of that whole number. In this case, we have to change 0.9 to 9, the whole number of 9. So let's think about what that math is. If we're moving the decimal one time to the right, really, what are we multiplying by? We're multiplying by 10. So 0.9 times 10 is 9. Well, whatever you do to the top, you have to do to the bottom times 10. So really, you're moving that decimal. Let me erase this for a second. So if we moved that decimal up top once to the right, we're going to be moving the decimal on the bottom once to the right. And then we will have to fill in a 0 there. And really what we're doing is we're multiplying 100 times 10, because on the top you multiplied by 10. So on the bottom you have to multiply by 10. 100 times 10 is 1,000. So 0.9% is the same thing as 0.9 over 100. Well, we can't leave that as a decimal in the numerator, so you move the decimal to the end of the number. In this case, we're going to be multiplying the top and the bottom times 10, and then our answer is 9 over 1,000. So now we had a percent, we had a fraction. How do we convert a fraction to a decimal? We're just going to divide there. 9 1,000ths, or it's how you read it, 9 thousandths. So we get 0.10ths, hundredths, thousandths. So we found our fraction and our decimal. Now let's do this, try it. We have 0.3%. To write it as a fraction, no matter what, to write a percent as a fraction, we rewrite the number over 100. 0.3 over 100. We can't leave it as a decimal, so we're going to move that decimal once to the right so that the decimal is at the end and that decimal becomes a whole number. Well, whatever you do to the top, you have to do to the bottom, and we would fill in 1 0 there. So it's like we're multiplying times 10. By moving the decimal once to the right, we multiply times 10 on the top, times 10 on the bottom. What's our new fraction? Our new fraction would be 3 over 1,000. Because 100 times 10 is 1,000. So we had the percent. We now have the fraction. What is 3 1,000ths or 3 thousandths as a decimal? 0.003. Let's do a review from yesterday's video. So let's start with 2/5 of a percent. 2/5 percent. How do we write that as a fraction? 2/5, 2/5 over 100. Well, what does that mean? That means we'll be dividing there. 2/5 divided by 100. In order to divide, we need them both to be fractions. How do we divide fractions? Keep, change, flip. Let's see what you get. 2/5 times 1 over 100. Can we simplify before multiplying here? Look on the diagonal. 2 and 100, can they both be simplified by the same thing? Yes, they can. 2 and 100 can both be divided by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 100 divided by 2 is 50. So our final answer is 1 over 250. If you didn't simplify before multiplying, you would have got 2 over 500, and then you would have to simplify by 2, and you would get the 1 over 250. Okay, now number 7. Number 7, we have 0.24%. Write that in your notebook. How do we write this as a fraction? We would have 0.24 over 100. So now how many times do you have to move the decimal to the right in 0.25 to make the whole number 25? We want to be able to write 0.25 as 25, where the decimal is really at the end. We just don't draw it. We don't write it. So we would have to move that decimal point twice to the right, which is the same thing as multiplying times 100. We know it's multiplying times 100 because there's 2 zeros there. So if I move my decimal to the right twice in my numerator, I have to move my decimal to the right twice in my denominator and fill in those zeros there. So my final answer would be 25 over 10 thousandths. We multiplied the top times 100 to move the decimal point twice to the right. We multiplied the bottom times 100 to move the decimal point 2 times to the right. Whatever you do to the top, you have to do to the bottom. Now let's write that as a decimal. You can just put it in your calculator. Or you can think about where the decimal point would be. We would have tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10 thousandths. So my number would have to finish in the 10 thousandths place, and then I would fill in my zeros. But you might as well double check that in the calculator. That way you know that you are correct.